I just mentioned to Susan that now I know who to blame for the anxiety I've been experiencing. The ombudsman role is new in terms of children's services, but ombudsman and the concept of ombudsman is age-old. The word actually comes from Swedish, and it is designed, it means problem solver. The first known ombudsman role was in the 1800s. So this is not a new role in government, particularly, or in business. There are ombudsmans all over the country, and there are ombudsmans internationally. The creation that the Louisiana legislature did in 2023 for children is a little different in that, as I've met other ombudsmen around the country, none of them have authority and responsibility for all services for children. Some are just for the child welfare system, for their departments that handle abuse and neglect, or they handle just children in mental health facilities, or they handle just children in corrections systems, or they handle just children's educational programs. In Louisiana, we rolled them all together. So let me tell you about this legislation and how it came about and what the plans, what the extent of the requirements are and what the plans are for the future. As Sandra indicated, the legislation was created in 2023. It started out being a role in the governor's office. The governor's office does have an ombudsman for long-term care patients, and so that was the original thought. But in the course of the legislation, it grew and it became more broad-based to cover services for all children. And the decision was made, and I wasn't part of these discussions, although I think Susan was, to place these services in the Legislative Auditor's Office. I don't know how much you know about the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. I can tell you that before I became an employee, I knew very little. But the mission of the Legislative Auditor's Office is to foster accountability and transparency in government with the goal to make government more responsive to the people of Louisiana. So the Child Ombudsman's Office is a division of the services offered by the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. The law, it was Act 325 of 2023, and it's currently in Title 24, Section 525. It outlines the broad focus of the office, and that being to safeguard the children of the state. The safeguarding of the children of the state is done by several different roles. One is public awareness of the services available, as well as the services of the Child Ombudsman, but also for education and training and advocacy for the rights of children and system reform. The slides will show you exactly what the statute says, but I want to talk about the nature of the work. There are 13 distinct duties of the Child Ombudsman, and I will say that when they first created this statute in 2023, they created the duties and the scope of work, but they didn't offer the tools necessary to do the work. So when I came on board in 2023, in an empty office, they did get me a computer, but there was nothing. We are building this from the ground up. The legislature did not understand the scope of the work that they were outlining, and so didn't give me access to records. So it was pretty hard to resolve a problem if I couldn't talk to an agency that is required by law to keep their information confidential. That problem has been solved. The law has been amended. But the other thing, before I accepted this job, I've learned a valuable lesson if I ever need it, but I'll share it. If somebody in the government wants to offer you a position in a newly created office, check the fiscal note first. They only funded one position. So with this vast amount of work to do, they thought one person could do it. And so when I started in October, it was just me. I was at church the day before I started, and one of my friends asked me about it, and I said, well, I'm building the plane while I fly it, and I'm flying solo. And my other friends looked over a glass and said, see, it looks like a crash landing is in your future. I'm still the heir. The work of the legislative auditor, in my view, falls really within two major buckets. One is an individual bucket where we are dealing with individuals who either their children or they are impacted by the systems that exist to protect children, and the second part is systemic reform. Now, I will tell you that in the last 14 months, the bulk of the work of the Child Ombudsman has been in these individual problem-solving arena. The law limits the authority that the Ombudsman has in intervening. We do not, for instance, have the ability to intervene in any kind of court proceeding. If a person is complaining about an outcome in a judicial matter, all I can do is refer them to appellate process, or if the complaint is about judicial conduct, to the Judiciary Commission. I can't solve that problem for them. The judge is the final say unless it's overturned by a higher court. But what we do is review and research their complaints, and we can make referrals for services. We've done a lot of that, connecting people with the right systems in their part of the state where they can receive the services that they need or that their child needs. And the next role, and the one that we do mostly, is act as a liaison between the child and the agency. And I'll give you an example. I don't know how familiar, I'm going to try not to talk in letters. That's one of the big problems that in the child arena is everything is an acronym. But there is a program, CCAP, which stands for Child Care Assistance Program, that is in the Department of Education. So individuals who are working but need help in paying for child care so that they can continue to go to work can receive assistance from the state, and that program is administered by the Department of Education. We get and individuals who receive child care assistance have to reapply yearly. We got several calls towards the end of last year about CCAP applications being denied as not timely. And when we investigated it, we found that the Department of Education offered 3 ways to file those applications. You could file them online, which was the department's preferred method. You could mail them through regular U.S. snail mail, or you could fax them. And so a lot of people faxed their applications. The department changed the fax number. They did not, however, change it on the actual application, nor did they change it on the website. So the individuals who were being denied for their applications not being timely filed because the applications were going out into cyberspace. It took 2 phone calls. That got corrected, and the department reinstated those applications. So we were able to intervene on behalf of families so that the services that these children and families were entitled to under our law were available to them. That's a success story for us, I think, and I have to find them where I can because not everything has been that easy to resolve. But that is an example of how we advocate for the needs of children by being a liaison and mediating with the department. The bigger body of work, and the one that I think has the capacity to make the biggest impact for the state, is the body of work to address systems. And in that regard, the Child Ombudsman is supposed to recommend changes in state policies concerning children. And this is in every agency. We are to evaluate the delivery of services to children and any entity. It's agencies and entities is what the law says. I'm not quite sure how broad a scope that is, but to identify what systems we were supposed to evaluate, I pulled the children's budget and was shocked at the number of agencies that receive funding under the children's budget for services for children. I did not know, for instance, that the Department of Natural Resources has a budget for children's services, and I don't know what they do with those services. I'm at the front end of this process. But we identify several pots of money to provide services to children, and that the children's budget that the governor is required to file and the children's cabinet prepares is not all of the money. That's the money from the executive branch. There are also direct line items to individual agencies or entities providing services to children, and there are also funds in other parts of the budget that are directly designated to help children. And any public funds that are expended to support children arguably are under the authority of the Child Ombudsman's office. Again, we're at the front end of this. The law requires that we periodically review and recommend changes in policies for any state agency regarding the placement of special needs children and services for special needs children. The Department of Health has several children in the custody of the department who, because of intellectual or developmental disabilities, are unable to live at home, and we will be reviewing those. We have received a couple of complaints regarding the treatment of special needs children in state facilities. We are to periodically review the procedures, all procedures, with a view to ensuring that the rights of the children are honored. And I began reviewing the state policies, the agencies' policies, the various agencies, and literally could fill up this wall on a bookcase, the number of policies that we are to periodically review. I'm thinking that periodically doesn't mean annually, so we'll see. In order to achieve this evaluation, we've developed what I call a work plan, but it's more in the nature of a strategic plan where we identify what services each of the agencies are required by law to provide, and then identify the data we're going to need to evaluate services and make data-driven decisions about changes that would benefit children in the state. And this is just an example for DCFS of the services that we will be evaluating and how we plan to do that. We are to periodically review all facilities, and this says review facilities and procedures for any institution or residence, public or private, where children are placed by a state agency. We did amend that in this last session because residences is now defined to be congregate care settings. It is, I don't think it would be beneficial to anyone for the state ombudsman to go review foster homes. Foster families are vetted before they receive foster children, and they are regularly monitored by case managers. I don't think they need ombudsmen popping up in the middle of their family life. So the definition by law now is any congregate care setting. So if it's a group home, or if it is a therapeutic setting that is congregate, that has more than one child, then those are the facilities that we will be reviewing and have reviewed. I've been to several group homes, and even one PRTF, that is a psychiatric residential treatment facility, to review the services and the processes, the procedures, and the treatment that the children are receiving. This one is a big step for us. This is to make biennial report on the conditions of confinement for any child that's in secure custody. So this is not only the secure custody facilities like Swanson Correctional Center for Youth or the Jetson Correctional Center for Youth that is under consideration for reopening, but also for any place that children are detained pre-trial, if the child also is detained there at the time of commitment to the department. I did tour the facility that, before it was opened in Jackson Parish, Jonesboro, that is designed, or was designed, to house children in container units about the size of a tractor trailer. The department, the Office of Juvenile Justice, has denied certification or licensing for this container facility, and it's been modified significantly. I've not been back, so I don't know what modifications have actually been made, but the conditions under which we house juveniles is of major concern to many of the legislators, and we will be making that report. Site visits are scheduled now for this year. We will be interviewing kids that are detained and interviewing kids who have been recently released from those facilities to get a clear picture of the conditions of confinement. I have a concern about retaliation, so I don't want to be interviewing children who are still in a facility and then report in a way that the facility might resent whoever told me whatever I report. So I'm very sensitive to the fact that these kids are in situations that they can't control, and I don't want to make anything any worse for them. But that report will be filed in February of next year, and it will report on the conditions that we found during our site visits this year. I do serve on the Child Death Review Panel. And if there is a death due to abuse or neglect, I have 24 hours to report it to the legislator who represents the district in which the child is deceased. And sadly, I've made a number of those reports. We are to conduct programs of public education. I'm counting this. It is important for the public to understand the existence of our office and what we can do to assist children and families. And that's why we're working on building the capacity of this office so that we can be responsive when people need our help. We are there for them. We are making suggestions for systemic reform, and we are involved in legislative advocacy. In fact, this is just about what I have to do for reporting. I do have help now. The point at which we started October of 2023, and like I said, it was an empty office. We've built a website, we've built some communication lines. I've met with the heads of every department and the leadership team in most departments, and we've received we're building a CMS, so our data management and case management systems will be more efficient and effective. So I'm hand counting the numbers of complaints we've received and the outcomes of those complaints, which is why I can't give you a reconciled number. But since October 1st of 2023, 15 months, we have received over 300 complaints. Most of them are against DCFS. We have had several complaints also about special education services and the treatment and discipline of special education students in various school systems around the state. We've also received complaints from kids in secure confinement. Since July, I've been the contact for the PREA line. PREA stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act, and the federal legislation requires every state to have a contact outside of the institution for any child who feels threatened, and we have received 2 calls from incarcerated youth. And in both of those circumstances, the institution responded immediately and moved the child so that they were safe. And we're also working with hospitals, this acute care facilities. I think we have a crisis in this state of children being stuck in acute care facilities. And it is especially troubling when the person who placed the child in the hospital is the Department of Children and Family Services. I met with the Hospital Association, and the reports I received was that there are some children who have been left in acute care facilities for over 300 days past the date of their medical discharge. These are suicide wards. These children are not receiving any kind of educational services, any kind of recreational services. They're just stuck waiting on the state to find another place for them. And there are lots of reasons for this. I met with a group of people who run the psychiatric residential treatment facilities, the step-down facility. If a child's suicidal and can be stabilized, that doesn't mean they don't need intensive treatment. We don't pay for that in this state. So there's some legislative fixes that need to occur. Right now, the legislature is meeting, in fact, this task force is meeting regarding the extent of child sexual abuse investigations and the way in which those investigations, that information is utilized by both the law enforcement systems, the DCFS systems, and court systems, because we found a big hole in our processes. And I will close with what happened that caused this task force to be created. A 13-year-old was suicidal. Her mother took her to the hospital, and she was PEC'd, which is Physician's Emergency Certificate, into a mental health facility. In that facility, she disclosed that her father was sexually abusing her. He was a 50-50 custodian, and the court was requiring her to spend half of the week with her father. She disclosed the sexual abuse to the counselor. The counselor called DCFS. DCFS investigated and validated the report. The custody judge suspended visitation. Dad appealed the valid finding. The department changed their finding from valid to invalid, which mooted the appeal, and the civil court judge requires this child to go see this father every week. that can't happen. We need to be able to protect children in a much more holistic way than we are doing. So the task force is made up of all of the people involved. There are law enforcement representatives, there are court representatives, there are DCFS representatives, there's a survivor of child sexual abuse, there is a custodial parent of a child who's been subject to one of these investigations, and a non-custodial parent, because kids can say things that aren't true. But we have got to, as a state, do a better job of protecting children. And I can tell you that in my entire career working with kids and kids' legal issues, I've always followed one simple rule. If I will accept for a child in state custody something I would not tolerate for my own, then something is wrong with me. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Kathleen, mention this.
Oh. At the back is the frequently asked questions I had mentioned to Greg. If you're committed to finding my website, you can. And there are frequently asked questions on the website, but I printed out several copies in case any of you have some specific questions. At the door. But I'll answer whatever questions I can.
Hey, Kathleen.
Hey, hey, Dr. Stewart.
Good to see you. I'm so glad that Sandra and the child advocacy community got you in this position, got you to say yes. I wish we had 64 child ombudsmen, one for every parish. And I'm trying to be really positive because I thought of something cute when you said that the Department of Natural Resources has a budget for children. That's good because the most precious natural resource in the state is the minds of our children. So grow that budget as best you can. Fortunately, I work for one of the Medicaid,
Managed care
the
operator.
chief medical officer for one of the Medicaid organizations. And I'm sitting here trying to think how many times I'm gonna bring something to your office of the things that I observe regularly. So we'll be chatting further.
Right, well, we're engaged right now with what has been considered by foster parents a crisis.
Yeah, there's just, anyway, there's so much opportunity to correct the wrongs of our state, and I'm glad you're in the position that you're in. And I hope everybody in this room is willing to help you, because folks, I've been saying this with these ladies for so many years, and other folks in the Children's Cabinet Advisory Board and whatnot, having worked 20 years at Earl K. Long. We are way, way, way past time to have done something. And it's an embarrassment to every single one of you, and me too, because our democracy has failed the children of the state of Louisiana, and we can do way better, way, way better. I ask you to read the newspaper. I ask you to get involved with your legislator, your city council member, your state representative, your senator, because if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And there's another saying, a government of sheep is eaten up by a bunch of wolves. So,
Well, one thing I will...
Happy New Year.
One thing I will say that I have discovered in the last 14 months, and there are plans to build the capacity of this office to address more fully and more holistically the needs of children. My budget request is due Friday, and the next hire will be an ombudsman specifically for education, primarily special education issues, because those can't wait. I would love to hire someone to do the conditions of confinement, just because I don't want to drive all over the state and walk and traipse through all of the jails. But I need somebody that has skills in the special education area. I do think that sometimes we leave our common sense at the door when we go to work for the state. And I think a lot of the changes that I'm seeing are just common sense changes. For instance, there's a real problem with placing children in foster care with their own families. I've had 17 grandparents seek my help in getting their own grandchild out of foster care into their home. And DCFS has a list that you have to to fulfill to be a certified foster home. And they tell these grandparents one thing at a time. There was a grandpa who had to go have a medical exam, but he didn't have the form. They hadn't given him the form to fill out to get his medical exam. When he got all that straight and took it in, they said, now we need your medical records from the same doctor's office he had just left. So one of the recommendations I made to them, I said, you know, I remember when my children were young and going to summer camp, I got a packet that told me everything I needed ahead of time, everything I was going to need to send to camp, and what the expectations were after camp. Why can't y'all just tell them everything at once and say, go? These people will go get this done. It takes sometimes 7 to 9 months to move a child out of foster home into their own family's home. And the move itself creates trauma in the life of the child. And any of you who've moved very much understand this. I've moved 4 times, and my last move I announced that my next move is to Ravenhorst and somebody else has to pack me. That's how traumatic moving can be. So we expect these children to adjust for their behavior to be fine when we move them 13 times in 14 months. And I think just using common sense, if we could just inject some common sense into the way agencies operate and consider whatever actions were taken, what impact it's going to have on the child, we'd have 100% better outcomes for children. And that's the whole purpose of this office, is to improve outcomes for Louisiana's children, which will improve the state. Time's up.